Hola, it's Beto here, your daily divinity coach. Gonna wait a little while for a couple people to join, or several people, hopefully. But this is episode number 11 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival, here on Facebook Live. My weekly series takes place every week here on Facebook Live, beginning at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so here on the West Coast, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time for those on the West Coast. So again, Beto here, your daily divinity coach, here for episode number 11, entitled The Peace That Surpasseth All Understanding, here on Facebook Live. And again, this is part of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival, which takes place every Sunday here on Facebook Live, beginning at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So very excited about this episode. We're going to wait for some people to join. But for this episode, The Peace That Surpasseth All Understanding, going to be talking about a few different topics, including grief, right? Anxiety, depression, addiction. So we're going to be covering those topics and talking about some stories and examples to help illustrate the point of this episode, which is this. Seeking the peace that surpasseth all understanding. So very excited about this episode. Again, we're just going to give a few minutes for people to join. But again, I'm here every week on Facebook Live. My name's Beto. Everybody calls me Beto. Your daily divinity coach. And here for episode number 11 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival. Very excited about this episode. Again, we're going to talk about topics including grief, addiction, depression, anxiety. So to begin, just talk a little bit about myself. So again, my name is Beto. I post regularly on social media, actually daily, which is why I'm known as the Daily Divinity Coach. So every day, except for today, because today I'm actually doing this series. Hello, Francisco. We got some people joining now. Rob's joining. But so again, I'm your Daily Divinity Coach, Beto, and I post daily on social media here on Facebook as well as Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, daily written inspiration, spiritual inspirations. And then in addition to that, I do these weekly series on Sundays. So I actually do the two of them. I do one on Instagram Live beginning at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and then immediately following, good morning, immediately following I come over here to Facebook Live and I do this one starting at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 8:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So those are the two things I do. I write daily posts and then I do these weekly live shows. In addition to that, I do one-on-one coaching. So if you're in need of one-on-one coaching, just let me know. You can direct message me, instant message me. If you have my phone number, you can text message me, and that's free up to 45 minutes. If you need more, we can work something out. Typically, if you read my post and you watch these shows with 45 minutes of coaching, you're all good. But if you need more, we can work something out. For this summer, I'm offering free scientific prayer. So if you have a need in your life and you want some prayer, again, you can direct message me, instant message me, text me if you have my phone number, and I'll say a prayer for you. If you want, and some people have done this, they've taken advantage of those free 45 minutes one-on-one coaching to talk about what's going on in their lives, the needs in their lives, and then actually I prayed with them a scientific prayer while on the phone. So, you're very welcome to do that. Other people have done that. And then finally, the third thing I have is I give away these free bands. So on the top here, Manifest Justice is the gray band, Manifest Justice. And then the blue one is Manifest Abundance. And then the fourth band is Manifest Immortality. And I give these out as a set of 3 bands. They are, for the most part meant to be worn as a set of 3, and I have all 3 here, but some people like to just wear it 1 at a time or 2 at a time. I mean, they're your bands once they get to you, so whatever you want to do with them. For those bands are free, and typically I ship just to the U.S. free because it's cost prohibitive to ship outside the U.S., but for the summer, for the rest of this summer, I am offering free shipping anywhere in North America, so Canada, Mexico, wherever in North America, as well as anywhere in Europe. So if you haven't gotten your bands yet, and you're somewhere in North America or Europe, just go ahead and direct message me or instant message me your address, and I'll get the ship out a set of bands to you. I believe I've sent out over a couple hundred sets of bands, mostly in the U.S., but Canada, Mexico, Eastern Europe, Western Europe. So there's these sets of bands all over now. So really excited about that. Everything that I do is free. I have no sponsor. I sponsor everything myself. I don't endorse anybody, any organization. So no faith-based organization, no company, nothing like that. I am a pluralist, so I teach all. So I have followers, quote-unquote followers, because I don't necessarily like that word, but I know social media does. So quote-unquote followers from all over the world, from all faiths and no faiths. So people are Hindu and Buddhist and Muslim and Catholic and Christian and Jewish, and people who just consider themselves spiritualist or agnostic or searching or atheist. I mean, I teach all. So just want to make sure that I get that point across. I am a Master of Divinity. I did get my divinity degree from Harvard, and but I have a day job that helps sponsor this. So again, everything I say, everything I do, it's all me. There's nobody or no organization behind me. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the content of today's episode. I'm going to go ahead and take off my glasses here. Really excited. Those are my reading glasses. Really excited about today's episode. Again, it's the peace that surpasseth all understanding, and we're going to be dealing and talking about topics including grief, depression, anxiety, and addiction. So let's go ahead. If you can see here, I got this worked out, so you can all see now. The words aren't backwards like they were last week. So I'm going to start with my first example for today's episode is Anthony Bourdain. Anthony Bourdain, a celebrated chef, right? He rose to the heights of the restaurant industry as a celebrated chef. And then he also did a TV series on CNN called Parts Unknown. And in 2014, he did an episode which really, I watched, I believe, all of his episodes. I mean, I was really into it. My mom owned a Mexican restaurant when I was a kid, and my first job was working in the restaurant. So I really enjoyed his episodes. And he didn't just talk about food and restaurants. He talked about culture and people, sometimes politics, sports. He did a great job, awesome episode, I thought. His wife was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. He did an episode when they went down, him and his wife went down to Brazil, and she competed, and they met some of the originators of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So he did some really neat episodes. So anyway, back in 2014, season 4, episode 7 of CNN Parts Unknown, he did an episode entitled Massachusetts Digging Deep. And in this episode, he actually went to Provincetown. Provincetown, Massachusetts is in Cape Cod. Here, I'm in Boston. I'm in Massachusetts. It's on Cape Cod, right there on the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. It's a resort community. There's beaches and restaurants, and people spend summer vacations there, or weekends in the summer there. So he went back to Provincetown for this episode and talked about how his first job in a restaurant, in a kitchen, was in Provincetown in Massachusetts for a summer. He worked there in Massachusetts, and then from there he went to Franklin County, Massachusetts, a rural community, and talked about the opioid crisis in rural America. And he used Franklin County, Massachusetts as the example because they're dealing with an opioid crisis. And he talked about his own addiction. Anthony Bourdain was a heroin addict, and in the 1980s he was able to overcome that addiction, but he talked about it. So this episode was really heartfelt, and I thought it was arguably his best episode. And when he's talking with the people there in Franklin County and their community response to this opioid crisis, he also tied that in with the war on drugs and how that was ineffective. That what we really need to do as a community is get around, embrace those dealing with addiction and help them and not demonize them. And so it's just a really, really great episode. Unfortunately, 3.5 years after this episode aired, Anthony Bourdain took his own life. He committed suicide. And it really hit me. In 2018, Anthony Bourdain's gone, right? No more of these episodes. And, I couldn't help but think, here's a man who's on top of the world, right? He's traveling the world, right? A man who could, he's eating the food of the world. He has enough resources to buy any meal he wants, right? And a lot of time they're free. Buy any clothes he wants, live in any house he wants, buy any car he wants, right? He has material abundance, right? But yet he took his own life. Why? And I, personally came to the conclusion, that whatever he was dealing with, anxiety, grief, depression, loss, whatever it was, at the end of the day, he didn't have peace, right? He lacked that peace, and that peace that surpasseth all understanding. So, when I talk about manifesting abundance, yes, on the ground level, it is about, if you need a vehicle, you pray, you manifest, you get that vehicle. If you need a home or a place to stay, you pray, you manifest that apartment, that home. Because these are the things we need, right, to survive. But the higher level piece of manifesting abundance is peace. This peace that surpasses all understanding. That's the higher level. That's what we're going for. That's the aim, is to achieve what ancient text calls that peace that surpasseth all understanding. Want to give another example of what I'm talking about when I talk about the peace of surpassing all understanding. DJ AM, his name, official name was Adam Michael Goldstein. He was born in 1973. And DJ AM, he was the first DJ, right, disc jockey, to sign $1 million contract. He signed a contract with Pure Nightclub in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace for $1 million. So he's the first DJ to reach that level of success. In this film, this documentary called As I Am, The Life and Times of DJ AM, came out in 2015. It chronicles his life. Tragically, DJ AM ended up dying of an overdose of cocaine, oxycodone, and other drugs that they found in his system. He died in his New York City apartment in 2009. But he was another person who, quote unquote, had it all, right? He had fame, he had looks, he had clothes, he had homes, cars. He even, in 2009, he did a cameo appearance in a Hollywood film, Iron Man 2. He played himself. He played DJ AM in a Hollywood film, Iron Man 2, with Robert Downey Jr. So he's, becoming known in Hollywood as now appearing in movies. But tragically, 2 months after he made that cameo appearance in that Hollywood film, Iron Man 2, he died of an overdose. And this was a young man. He was 36 when he passed away, or I believe 36, who had been addicted in his late teens, early 20s. He dealt with alcoholism, addiction to crack cocaine, but had overcome that addiction. This is the amazing part of this story. Just like Anthony Bourdain, he had overcome heroin addiction. DJ AM actually had overcome his addiction for many years, and even became a sponsor for others. He was a sponsor of others who were dealing with alcoholism and dealing with drug addiction, but unfortunately had a relapse. And it ended up tragically passing away in 2009. But this film talks about, chronicles his life. And again, when I think of DJ AM, just like with Anthony Bourdain, a person who had it all, quote unquote all, right, all the material things, what was lacking, obviously there's grief and anxiety and addiction, there's things that they're dealing with, but for me, what they're really lacking was that peace, right? That peace that surpasses all understanding that ancient text talks about, right? So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to flip this here. Back in 1962, right? Back in 1962, a book came out called The Cross and the Switchblade. And this book chronicled the story of a young rural preacher by the name of David Wilkerson. In 1958, David Wilkerson was a rural preacher in Pennsylvania, didn't have much money, still young, he wasn't, he's still early in his career. And he was looking through the newspaper one day, and he saw an article about gangs in New York. Gangs in New York. And it just struck him, and he felt moved to do something about it. And before you know it, David Wilkerson, this young, rural Pennsylvania pastor, is moving to New York City to work with gang members. He knew nothing about gang members, right? Knew very little about the urban environment. But there he is, and he just put himself out there. And he ends up befriending, over time, it didn't happen all at once, but over time befriending a young Latino gang member by the name of Nicky Cruz. And Nicky Cruz was a Latino gang member involved in crime and drugs and you name it. But before you know it, Wilkerson's working with them. He ends up converting, and he becomes he becomes a worldwide evangelist. Nicky Cruz does. From gang member to worldwide evangelist, overcomes the crime and the gangs and the drugs. He achieved that peace that surpasseth all understanding and completely turned his life around. It was unbelievable. And that movement there with the cross and the switchway, that book actually, it sold bestseller, over 50 million copies sold, over 30 languages the book was printed in. But that led to a whole movement of these street preachers, people who just go out in the street and just start working with addicts and gang members and whatnot. And I was actually part of a church that that traced its roots to this movement with Wilkerson and Cruz, and for nearly a decade. And what drew me to them was that they were doing this work with urban youth, with urban people who are dealing with these issues of violence and gangs and drugs, and helping these people find peace and turn their lives around and become productive citizens. And so for nearly a decade, I was part of a ministry, a church that did this type of work, and I was did the prison ministry part of this church. And so my job was to go and do I was an assistant prison chaplain. So I'd go into the youth facilities and work with the young people and whatnot. So, but was again, a miracle about this was that these people who are dealing with this trauma, right? This trauma of violence and gangs and poverty and everything else, were able to find that peace. And this is why I like to talk about neuroplasticity, that our brains can overcome trauma. It's possible you can overcome it. And as a matter of fact, one of the young people that I work with in my prison ministry, he's a quote unquote follower. He watches this live show every week here on Facebook Live, and he's got a family and he's working and he's reports great things. So it can be done. The piece is out there. So I'm just go ahead and turn this here. We're going to go on to the next examples. So let's talk about COVID-19, the pandemic, what people are going through, because we're all going through this globally. We're all going through this, right? 800,000 plus mortalities, right? Deaths because of COVID-19 thus far, right? And it's not over yet. Over 175,000 deaths just in the U.S. as a result of COVID-19. And again, unfortunately, we're not over. People are still dying, every day, every minute, every hour. So people are dealing with this, right? They're dealing with real grief over loss, right? This is happening right now all around us. People are grieving over economic insecurity, right? The loss of jobs, the loss of finances. Here in the state of Massachusetts, which for the compared to other states in the U.S., it's a well-educated state. Yet we got the highest. I'm here in Boston, in Massachusetts, state of Massachusetts, we got the highest unemployment rate in the U.S., over 16%. And that's the unemployment rate that the government puts out there. Real unemployment rate, we know, is higher than that. It's closer to 20, maybe beyond 20%. But just in Massachusetts, 16%. So people are dealing with not just loss of life, right, more deaths, right, but they're also dealing with financial insecurity, right? Economic insecurity, loss of jobs. Moving on, I don't know if you all saw this, but CDC did a survey recently, in regards to the mental health of people in the U.S. Amidst this pandemic, COVID-19. And this survey results 13 plus percent reported substance abuse due to the pandemic. 13 plus percent of respondents reported substance abuse. This is the shocking one for me. Over 25% of young adults ages 18 to 24 in the U.S. had thoughts of self-destruction as a result of the pandemic, right? Thoughts of suicide as a result of the pandemic. Moving on, 30 plus percent of those surveyed reported anxiety or depression as a result of the pandemic. And 40 plus percent reported some sort of mental or behavioral condition, health condition as a result of the pandemic. So this is real, right? This is really what's happening. These are statistics. People are suffering. People are suffering grief. They're suffering anxiety, addiction, depression. I mean, it's happening all around us, right? People are dealing with these things, even though they may seem to be invisible for the most part. You know, this is what people are dealing with. So moving on from the survey, I don't know if you've seen this article, but it's a really good article. It's called "The Unraveling of America" by Wade Davis for the Rolling Stone, published August 6, 2020. So just a couple weeks ago. In this article, Wade Davis talks about, the unraveling of America and how COVID-19, this pandemic, may very well spell the end of the American empire. And he does a great job of talking about empire, talking about the European domination, white supremacist empires, right? The Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire, the French Empire, the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and the last but not least, the American Empire, right? In this era of the American Empire, and it's how it's unraveling. He even talks about addiction and addiction to not just illicit drugs, but prescription drugs, and just the high rates of it within this country, the high rates of, or the high gap between the rich and the poor, how much wealth is concentrated in just a small amount of in the hands of just a small amount of people. Talks about wars and all the wars this country has fought in a relatively short amount of time, and how the military spread out, and again he talks about the unraveling of America and what how this pandemic could very well be the end of the American empire. And if you look at the CDC survey, wow, right? I mean, he could very well be right, and I in my opinion, I think he's really not just onto something, but I think he's pretty accurate, except for one thing. In the article, Davis talks about empire and how the American empire is just going to go ahead and pass the torch on to China, and that China will be the next empire. See, that's not. This is where I have to disagree with Davis, because that's not what my oral history teaches me. The oral history of the indigenous Mexicans, right, the Maya, the Mexica, the Aztec, as I've been taught, is that the fifth sun is dawning. This era of the fourth sun is ending, and this era has been the era of white or European supremacy. There's already been an era of Asian supremacy, so the Chinese have already gone through this, right? There was an era of indigenous American supremacy. There's an era of African supremacy. So the world's already seen these. So it's not that the torch is going to be passed from the American empire to the new Chinese empire. No. That's they've already had their empire. What's happening is this fifth sun is dawning, where there will be no empires, because domination, it's demonic, it's devilish. It's empires aren't the way it's supposed to be, right? The fifth sun is about us all getting along together, us living in harmony with each other and with nature. That's what's coming, and that's already started. And so that's where I differ with Davis, but a great read. I really enjoyed his work, and I think he's right on when he's talking about empire. Wanted to end with one more story. And this is the story of San Jose Mercury News investigative reporter Gary Webb. There's a movie done called Kill the Messenger, as a 2014 film about Gary Webb. Gary Webb, investigative reporter, uncovered that the CIA, right, was dealing drugs to South Central LA, specifically to an individual called Freeway Rick Ross there in LA. And so they're dealing drugs, which actually fueled the crack epidemic in South Central LA and just caused devastation to communities, not just in South Central, not just in LA, but around, across the nation. And but Gary Webb unveiled that those drugs were being dealed to Rick Ross, or Freeway Rick Ross, by the CIA, and the proceeds of those dealings were going to fund the Contras down in Nicaragua, who are fighting the communists. And amazing story, amazing film. Unfortunately, Gary Webb was marginalized because of his work. He ended up tragically taking his own life, but he was later exonerated, because what he uncovered was, truth. He was after truth. He was a true investigative reporter, and he uncovered truth. The truth is that the empire has been not just attacked from outside, right? Pearl Harbor, 9/11, COVID-19, but also from inside. We've been doing this to ourselves, right? So again, a fabulous piece, and it really brings this piece of justice, which I always begin with justice. Although we talked a lot about abundance and the higher order of manifesting abundance, which is this peace that surpasseth all understanding, but this takes us back to justice, because I always say start with justice, right? And there needs to be justice. We can't, condone the behavior of what our government is doing to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and end there. Thank you so much for joining and participating. This is an episode I've been wanting to do for a long time, because I know a lot of people are dealing with grief and anxiety and depression, economic insecurity, grieving the loss of loved ones who've lost their lives as a result of COVID-19, and dealing with addiction and other things. So it's an important episode, one I've been wanting to do for some time. It very well could have easily been episode number 1. It ends up being episode number 11. But again, thank you for your participation. I'll be back here next week. Beto, your daily divinity coach, here on Facebook Live. I'll be here next week again, starting at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 8:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time on Facebook Live. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and grab my reading glasses and turn this off. Bye-bye.